creating a giant leap towards the east. From Mexico, we're going to India. Our next presenter is Ambrish Dhaka, Associate Professor at the Center for In-Asia Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, India. We will be hearing quantitative research, the geopolitical visualization of microblogging through data analytical methods.
Thank you, dear organizers.
Yes, please go ahead.
I'll be very frugal with the pleasantries and directly go towards the topic. May I be able to share the screen, because I have my presentation with me, and if I'm allowed to.
Please go ahead, everything should be working just fine.
Okay. Then I think my screen should be available.
We are seeing everything now, it's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess I have 12 minutes or so, and I just very pinpointed backgrounder, because today most of the theoretical setting that had been discussed and quite a few you can say the tracers which I underscored have got to my mind, and I think the dichotomous relationship of geopolitics that it harbors with the geographical community and the community of or the practitioners of international studies, it remains. That dichotomy is persistent. But then again, this dichotomy as an identity is one aspect, but then the methodological aspect of agent structure problem was also simultaneously underscored, and that too remains a very important concern in geopolitical discourse. However, I try to escape these contradictions by one of my very simple methodological understanding, and what I as a geographer has always believed, that the task of geopolitics or understanding geopolitics, the way geographers approach the political phenomena, can be more consistently measured by the visual approach and the use of maps. So for me, maps becomes a language. Maps become the testament of any geographical fact you can categorize, you can outlay, and those maps can range from the cartographic exercise to what Peter Gould has mentioned, the mental maps. So the range of understanding the language of maps is fairly widespread, and from that motivation I draw your interest to this approach, because basically I will be demonstrating how the data analytical maps, the visualization is important in understanding the discourse. It can be seen as a critique of the critical geopolitics at one level, because the textuality which was seen as an authoritative work of some 20th century imperial exercise definitely did not stop, and the world is constantly evolving in terms of spatial perceptions. The people harbor not only the authorities and the state, but people also have the ability to create the narratives, to create the space. So let's go into this discussion with the idea that how this small tool, Twitter, has created some very strong structures of spaces, or you can say the spaces of collective consciousness, which definitely have drawn attention of the state policy framework, and they look into it very seriously. So if we go into this understanding, then this from 140 to 280 character communication has a lot of nuances in terms of freedom of speech, civil liberties, equalitative action, but at the same time it also has the capacity to create the alter state entities which can influence the state's monopoly to use the power within its territory. And social media dissemination to users interested in topic create a kind of a common interest group which can previously may not exist physically, but then on a virtual space can gain that identity, and it can then emerge as a physical identity as well. So the discourse can create a cultural phenomena which hitherto did not exist, and then social groups can socially create or you can say influence the social hierarchy. So what is virtual can translate into real. That is something what Hegelian paradox is we have witnessed in our theoretical debates. Marxist dimension or Marxist criticism exists to this approach, but then we will not go into that debate. So some people have shown that this is some kind of a real-time democracy. Now, real-time democracy means you instantiate any public opinion and you create your vote by using the Twitter buttons like retweet, or you like, or you try to quote the tweet and you have your own views. So this instantiation of democracy, which without it only gives a kind of a perceptive consciousness, can be a real challenge in terms of society's general culture and social reproductivity, because social relations and those imbibing the material conditions cannot be easily or you can say cannot be altered even if there is a transition is required into those spaces. So these social networking sites have created a kind of a stress on the state society relations, because the kind of a opinionated action that comes through this medium is too fast for the state to respond to. So these are some of the characteristics, because I am trying to describe the nature of Twitter, because before going into the methodology, it's a very specialized methodology which I am trying to introduce to you, and this background is a little bit necessary. So one of the most important tasks as a student of geopolitics, or you can say a student of strategic communication, is to understand what tweets actually mean. So the small communication themselves, the idea may be very simple, but the requirement of domain where it should be communicated becomes very important. So the network that it generates has more value than the tweet itself. That is one of the important aspects one has to understand, and that is where the most of the, you can say, the concept of you or the whole idea of critical geopolitics get into play, that rewriting of the space can be as rapid as the network that gets created by a certain you can say message or communication. And also the social scientists have a as a observant, non-participant observant can see the network as an objective entity. So this is also a very important aspect in understanding this tool. So not only its political capability, but it's as a intellectual or you can say phenomena. You can use this as for your further understanding of the social space. So the important elements of Twitter are basically visualization and perception. These are two very important, because how the message creates a network and it is visualized, and how people respond to it, the perception that is drawn, that is important. Now it is not only because the entities that involved in the communication range have a very wide range. It may be a state agency, it may be interest group, it may be any political corporate group, it may be individual mass public, or you can say any other, and you have algorithmic computational you can say code behaviors who can generate a lot of perceptive and visual networks as well. So the evolution of this Twitter had actually started with people having the urge to share their day's event and activity, and somehow it was earliest of the you can say the primitive of the Twitter was basically the status what I had for lunch kind of communication that you want to share with your peer group. Then gradually the Twitter evolved into what you call the major layers of communication, in which you have the people who follow you, and you try to share the information in terms of your visual communications and other layers of communication. But this was basically, the idea was that your personalized public space means you can own a public domain within your own choice of followers, and the choice of community, which is something quite unique in terms of understanding, because then you have a pedigree of communication always established with your followers. And this is quite interesting in terms of understanding the what you call how the networks get created on Twitter. So one of the most um, easiest way of what the most of the people do is that they look for the hashtags as important trending topics in order to identify the communication. And here the second dilemma that emerges as a geopolitician is that we as a practitioner, as a thinker of geopolitical understanding, have a divide, what is known as a digital divide, because the most of the Twitter analytical exercises that you see as a configuration are developed by the computer and IT specialists. So for them, tweet is a coding element, and how to analyze that, it's basically the motivation is derived from their knowledge of computational techniques. They are not really looking tweet from the geopolitical fact or phenomena. So this is the second digital divide, I mean second divide for a geopolitical scholar of geopolitics, because he unless he tells the computer scientist that these are my motives, he's not going to, I mean the IT specialist is not going to prioritize the kind of nature of communication that the scholar wants to have. So somehow I was actually I am a basically hobby coder, so I wrote couple of codes in order to work around my own priorities of social scientist as a social scientist, and develop this practice as a kind of a possible as a pedagogical tool. So moving on from this, defining the idea of personal public spaces, the one of the most important behavior in the tweet is the retweet. And the retweet is the what you call the silver bullet in order to note down the networks. So if you are able to note the behavior of the retweets, then you are able to extract plenty of information about the people, the groups, their opinion, their taste, and their behavior. But yes, retweets can be algorithmic. People can deploy software to amplify certain phenomena, but then the whole idea here is not to chase like a computer scientist. As a scholar of you can say geopolitical understanding, what we would use, you use the visual methods to understand the nature of the communication, and we will be able to also move beyond the this bot behavior in order to understand the communication. So this is a small GUI which I wrote in Python, and definitely I actually, in order to contextualize the discussion, I collected the tweets on Ukraine nuclear NATO Zelensky on 13th October 2022. Previously, when this I had written to this organizers about my participation, at that point of time I had actually India, Pakistan as my area of interest, and I was trying to collect the tweets. But then I thought that the region where I will be discussing this methodology, it will be better to have any contemporary exercise. So based on that, I quickly changed my data of analysis, and these are all you can say Python libraries which the code is which I have been able to use, and these are all the skills which I have with me in processing the JSON data and using the Jupyter notebook and RStudio, R programming. I do these kind of things. So all this is within my range of exercise. So I created this corpus of 52,916 tweets, and then I began with what I see myself as developing a methodology of understanding the narrative on these lines. So a tweet has plenty of elements. it has created, it had its ID, it had this string, then you have text and reply to whom, and all various 16 to 17 elements, and you can do what you call create a panel data or parsing these elements and create a kind of a like a CSV file which can be of maybe around 30 megabytes or so, something like that. And this file then I imported into the R programming language, where I developed the code for seeing, visualizing, because there is a JavaScript library known as Visual Network, through which I try to understand the nature of the hierarchy of communication. Let's take it as a, in order to extract the hierarchy of communication. So the exploratory data analysis is something basic. You can, for every corpus of communication, you can see which are the maximum tweeted, what are the frequencies, and what are the URLs, what are the frequency of count. So these are elementary information. You can use it for your further subsequent analysis, but this is not my one of the areas of you can say focus. I just came across these kind of network data of interest, where the physics of the network was quite interesting and intriguing to me. Obviously, I cannot put the video of that these tweets moving around into the space. How the this is one node, you can see this is one single node which has been retweeted by this bunch of multicolored nodes. So all these nodes were basically retweets. And when these nodes are interconnected, so you can see that what one user has actually tweeted, and this is connected by the bunch of host of other tweets, and there are many interrelated communications. So these you can say structures were a matter of interest for me to understand, or whether explore the possibility of can we use this as a part of understanding the narratives on which is on ground, and using this data and applying this practice on the tweets the collected on Ukraine is was matter of some interest to me. So the method which I borrowed is basically from botanical, or you can say life sciences, and this is known as histology. Histology means you actually have a cross section of any organ, and that actually transparent cross section allows you to see the arrangement of tissues. So same analogy was derived in order to understand the tweet histology, or you can say the network histology. Means you have a corpus of tweet on a particular topic, the 52,000 tweet, you cannot make out any sense of it unless you develop some very method of examining the tweets across a particular section of communication. So how to extract that section of communication, I borrowed this methodology of histology, and I term it as the histology of tweet network as one of the methods that I am going to introduce to you. So the slicing of the retweet network structure, I created certain frequency parameters, and these frequency parameters roughly are actually based on the distribution of histogramic distribution of the nature of retweets. So highest were ranging around 8,000, and I created a first band of 7 to 8,000. Then there was no retweet of the range of say 6,000 to 4,000. Then I created the other subsequent, and finally some of the very small ranges, in order to sample those cross sections of tweet and see what kind of patterns on nature that is emerging through these networks. So all this is being coded and run on the R programming language that I am using. And the first structure that comes to my mind is that these two explosive Twitter storms, which were actually of these two people, you must be very much knowing Michelle McFall and Kylan Becker. These two guys had two very explosive retweets, roughly amounting to 7 to 8,000 at the time of collecting data. Later on, when I revisited for my writing this paper, yes, the number keeps on quite increasing. But then a point here, important point here, is that how the communication which is structured on these two are actually so much of unilinear in terms of their behavior. So the idea was that one communication speaks about the you can say targeting the Russian authorities, At the same time, the second communication that comes is that the irresponsible behavior of the Ukrainian leadership, and these two have fair amount of polarization and the degree of circulation that has in this. So this one graph, or you can say this one design, shows that there is a kind of a, at the highest level, one of the sharp polarities. Then I went for the other down structures to examine what other else the communication structures are available. So we go back down to the 2000 to 4000 retweets, and we have some degree of new innovative, you can say, developments where three trilateral polarities were available, and in which I try to note down what are these tweets and what is this development is all about. Interestingly, one tweet was actually removed, and this tweet was about the Ukrainian president advocating the preemptive strike, which was a huge embarrassment for him. So this immediately was, most of the Twitter data actually deleted that information, and this you can say the damage cover-up exercise was being done there. So this is no longer available, but luckily I had, since I had downloaded the corpus, so I had this tweet and I have this tweet ID as well, which was deleted. But then interesting part was that again, that at this level of retweets, the polarization was there, but then the important the important aspect is that what these three tweets are actually talking about. So when we talk about the go into this, we see that one of the tweets was very interesting, where the American professor Jeffrey Sachs has actually criticizing the irresponsible behavior of the media in covering the Ukrainian narrative of explosive kind. At the same time, Michelle Millerman is actually quoting Elon Musk on the idea of what kind of the possibility of rapprochement that can be one have. So these were the narratives which were actually coming up in response to what the earlier was one of the tweet which did not which was deleted, was the Ukrainian president's reference to those kind of explosive you can say mindless behavior. So working on this this tweet group, I could see that there were certain users who actually retweeted all the three tweets. Means the tweet of the Ukrainian president, the tweet of Jeffrey Sachs, and this Millerman's tweet. So what kind of group of interest these people are, who are actually tweeting both the opposite polarities? I mean, he is actually looking into both the narratives, and he is finding the narrative interesting, and is it some kind of a algorithmic group? Means, are they bots? Or is it some kind of a group which has a certain strategic communication, who wants to create certain amplify certain information? Do they have the other interest? So you can come across with all those kind of exploration, and you can increase your understanding based on your design and desire. So this was another one of the area. Now further, I will just quickly move into the other aspect of this the histology of tweets. I could see there was a high degree of polarity, and within that polarity there was an algorithmic communication of a group, and as well as there was a visual homogeneity of the communication group. So this was the outcome of the algorithmic community, this table which I am showing you, but this is not equal to this visualization, because this is something which is entirely a different group. So these kind of strategic communities, which were the totally outcome of visual as well as algorithmic differences, I was able to note, and you can come up with what kind of common behavior these groups are having. What kind of communication they want to derive it? Are they want to or do they want to influence? So these kind of exercises you can further get into this, and the more you go at in the lower scale of retweets, the degree of polarity gets very hazy. But then there are certain important communication. For example, one communication that did not show up in Indian media was that the Indian Prime Minister had requested Zelensky to de-escalate and avoid shelling of the Zaporozhye plant. Now, nowhere in the Indian media this communication was available, but I could see that in the lower order of retweets, this communication was available and somewhere it was shared. So the histological approach also allows you to understand the deliberate attempts to suppress certain communication in certain spaces, and complemented by these histology of network. If you go by what you call the mainstream media, you can see how the narratives are created, where the narratives are modulated, where the narratives are suppressed, and then you can make your understanding that what is the exact nature of things that is moving on. Because mainstream media, when cross-examined through this histological networks, gives a lot of hint in what is the possible turn of events that is going to happen. And perhaps students of IR or students would find these kind of exercises much interesting, because Twitter is actually generating a lot of real-time data. There is a regular outpouring of information. Your coding exercises can give you almost a kind of a fortnightly analysis of many kind of things, and you can make your sharp comment and commentaries on the events that are turning up and which are difficult to predict. Because so this approach of visualizing the narratives uh, and creating a kind of understanding about the geopolitical events through Twitter networks is of interest. And I think students can be it is given this kind of training for further elaboration. So I will stop here. That was the only exercise I wanted to share with you, and I hope it generates some interest and queries from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, because it's one of those rare instances of theoretically well-founded quantitative research, which is even reinforced with some case studies.
Well, I should also say that I'm very pleased to see you all here today, although it's kind of late. But still, we're here to discuss some very interesting matters. So first, I think I'll start with the presentation delivered by Mr. Andrzej Traka. So, of course, I should say that today, political scientists are very much interested in using statistical analysis and, in their research, and qualitative analysis becomes prima prima method in such kind of research. I find that the delivered presentation was not only informative, but also, I suppose, if I understood correctly, gives us more resources to do the parsing of the sites. See, in the example that was brought to Twitter. And I suppose that it's going to be much easier than working, say, with RStudio or trying to do that in any other source, literally the program, as I understood, does it automatically. But I have some questions about the presentation. First off, from your point of view, Mr. Traka, what do you think, given that Elon Musk is now the head of Twitter, and the speculation has it that it will distort drastically the American elections. So, what do you think? Will it, shift the role of Twitter in politics and in public policy, namely? My second question is about the thing that, building those networks, if I understood correctly, brings us the instruments to see who are the main or the key policymakers, and who we should pay attention to, especially, for instance, if we are analyzing the Arab Spring. We want to understand how it happened and how it happened in the media, in social media. And some other questions about technical issues within the program, probably not issues, but something that came to mind. Did I understand correctly? So that we can clear out the bots and the fake accounts there. So we see, they can be just some accounts that deliver some content, but we cannot trace who the person is. So does your program deal with this problem? And my other question is, how do we actually set the thresholds? Because, well, that's a very pressing issue, because if you move it up or down, you can see different results, and they can be either way distorted or not quite informative. So how do we choose that? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
The floor to answer the question.
Shall I proceed? Shall I proceed?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. These are very pertinent questions, because one of the, to begin with, let's start from the reverse order. Let's address the issue of threshold. There are several methods of identifying. One of the convenient method is that if you go by the distribution, that is histogram, if you develop the histogram approach, you can have the major, what you call the peaks, and you can polarize your frequencies around those peaks. That is one approach. There are other methods also, since the approach has been basically on what I have been experiencing in terms of analyzing the convenience of code and the data. So natural jinking is another aspect. You can use it for the distribution of the tweets. So all it depends on the what exactly is the what you call the a kind of a pattern, if you want to see that. So lot of discretion is there now, but then the point here is that we are actually looking at not the communication, we are looking at the structure of the communication. That is very important to understand, because communication can be the word when you use what you call what are the unauthenticated tweeters, or you can say the bots, or the people who are actually not existing. For example, recently the news was that the Twitter has actually deleted plenty of accounts because they were fake accounts. Question here is that if you are chasing the individual tweets and the narratives, actually the very purpose of is defeated, because that is not going to lead you to any conclusion. The whole exercise or the motive of the histology of the network is to understand the structure of the network, because again the debate is again between the Weberian methodological individualism, or you have the Durkheimian approach of structural consciousness. So what consciousness that is going to devote is something which is irrelevant whether the bot is working or there is an authenticated user is doing, because somebody has a motive to create those structures. So idea here is to look at the structure of the communication, and there where actually the histology of the network gives you the relevant information. So this is one element which has to be borne in mind while doing this kind of histological practice. Now coming to the Twitter studies which have been done on say Arab Spring, yes, definitely those causalities are basically a mix of what actually social media is able to deploy in terms of what you call the mass movement or civil society actions. That is the aspect which actually is not falling in the domain of my methodology. My methodology is actually purely based on the coding exercise which I am doing. But yes, definitely that has a very relevant background, because once you have set the parameters of investigation, then your choice of keywords in actually downloading and scraping the tweet data becomes very important. So I use the term say such as nuclear, Ukraine, Zelensky. That was because around 13th of October, if you look into the events that were going around, that became a source of what you call my preliminary exploration in identifying the domain of my tweet data. Because at random you cannot download any kind of tweet data. You have to be very choosy, or you have to decide what are the keywords which have to be deployed in terms of scraping the data. Otherwise, without any keywords you cannot actually download the data. So even the very act of downloading the data becomes the biased exercise, or you can say my own preferences become involved into it. But then that is something which you have to take as a position as an embedded scholar. You can't avoid that. And yes, Twitter is now a private entity, and I would have to again re-examine whether even my code is now actually reproducible with the kind of changes that Twitter has brought in. So I will have to again resample my data with my code I haven't really downloaded and used because I didn't get time from 13th of October. But yes, now I will try to have again doing that exercise. So
thank you for your brilliant presentation and for these insightful comments. And thanks to all participants of today's discussion. Unfortunately, we have to cut it here. Any further questions should be addressed via email or in person. And now the conference proceeds into